This video will strongly argue that in its SR15 2018 report issued to policymakers worldwide, the IPCC overstates the degree of global warming caused by human activities. It should be noted that this video could not have been produced without access to the data and papers produced by climate scientists. Here is a list of the climate science sources used. During 2018, the IPCC celebrated 30 years of assessing climate science. In October 2018, it issued a special report on the impacts of global warming of 1.5 degrees centigrade above pre-industrial levels. This video will present an overwhelming case that the IPCC SR15 2018 report contains a critically misleading and nebulous claim that misinforms world governments. As such, it needs to be corrected. Before providing the evidence, we need to set the scene and clarify some definitions. To be clear, this video is not disputing climate change per se. The climate is always changing. However, your attention is drawn to this statement that human activities are estimated to have caused approximately 1.0 degrees centigrade of global warming above pre-industrial levels, with a likely range of 0.8 to 1.2 degrees centigrade. It is the very first statement in the SR15 summary for policymakers. But caveat lector, readers beware. The statement at first sight seems quite straightforward, but it is anything but. It is worth asking yourself, do you really know what that means? How is it defined, and how is it measured? For example, from what and to what base temperature is the warming being measured? Not wishing to teach anyone how to suck eggs, but if we wish to measure a 100-meter track, we must first have a start point and an end point. And we are aware of the issues that can arise if there is confusion over either one or both. So, just what are the start and end points used to measure global warming? The IPCC, in the same SR15 report, gives its definitions. Global warming is expressed as the estimated increase in GMST averaged over a 30-year period. This is relative to pre-industrial levels. So pre-industrial levels is the start point. But how is pre-industrial levels defined? The IPCC uses the reference period 1850 to 1900 in order to approximate pre-industrial GMST. So, to summarize, the start point, base temperature, from which global warming is measured, is the average over the 1850 to 1900 period. This is known as the reference period, and it approximates to the pre-industrial GMST. The end point is the GMST averaged over a 30-year period. This is flexible, and as an example, the most up-to-date endpoint would be the average GMST of the 30-year period from 1988 to 2017. Having set the scene, we are now ready to critically examine this statement. We will take a series of steps toward our eventual set of conclusions. In the first step, we will critically examine the IPCC's use of the reference period 1850 to 1900 as the start point for the measurement of global warming. A strong case against the use of this period will be put forward. Various reference periods are in use by climate scientists. So why does the IPCC use this particular period? We can examine two possibilities. The reference period 1850 to 1900 represents an approximately normal or optimum GMST, and or the reference period 1850 to 1900 is an appropriate start point to bring out the causal connection between global warming and the increase in levels of carbon dioxide since the Industrial Revolution. We will first look at whether the reference period 1850 to 1900 represents an approximately normal or optimum GMST. We can examine the last 2,000 years using this chart published by the IPCC in 2013. This close-up view will help. Observing the period 1450 to 1850 in the Northern Hemisphere, it is clearly well below the temperature of the preceding 1,000 years. The same applies to the Southern Hemisphere and globally. This is widely acknowledged, and the period is known as the Little Ice Age, in recognition of its low global mean surface temperature. The reference period 1850 to 1900 immediately follows the Little Ice Age, and it too is seen to be colder than the previous 1,450 year period leading up to the Little Ice Age, which is clearer when we look at the global view. To back up this visual impression, it would be good to turn to climate data. Unfortunately, not only does the global view cover just 1,500 years, but also it does not have many studies from which to extract data. The Northern Hemisphere has more studies, and we will select two. From this study, we see that the average temperature for 1850 to 1900 was less than the average temperature for the period 0 CE to 1450 CE, leading up to the Little Ice Age. This second study arrives at the same conclusion. Much stronger evidence will follow, but for now we feel justified in asserting that the reference period 1850 to 1900 was on average colder in the Northern Hemisphere than any period over the previous 1,900 years, apart from the Little Ice Age. However, to obtain stronger evidence, we need to expand both the period of study and the number of climate data sources. We expand the period of study by extending it to cover the Holocene. More data is provided by a study published in 2013 that carried out the enormous task of taking data from 73 separate records and produced a reconstruction of regional and global temperature for the past 11,300 years. And we can refer to this study to determine just how cold was the reference period with respect to the Holocene. The last glacial cycle lasted for around 100,000 years and reached its maximum about 18,000 years ago, when Canada, large parts of North America, Great Britain and Northern Europe were covered with thick ice sheets. The ice sheets receded and our present Holocene emerged. The study used the anomaly reference period of 1961 to 1990. It found that the pattern of temperature showed a rise as the world emerged from the last deglaciation. This was followed by warm conditions until the middle of the Holocene, and then a cooling trend over the next 5,000 years that culminated around 200 years ago in the Little Ice Age. Looking at the Little Ice Age, it stands out as being colder than any other period, which is confirmed by the Marquardt study. To make the next point, we probably need to focus in on the period 0 to 1920. This brings out the Little Ice Age of 1450 to 1850. And right next to it, the combined period of 1850 to 1900 and 1900 to 1909. The importance of this will become apparent in just a moment. Returning to the full period, the Marquardt study found that the decadal mean global temperature of the 1900 to 1909 period was cooler than greater than 95% of the Holocene. The IPCC reference period 1850 to 1900 is thus trapped between the Little Ice Age and a period that was cooler than 95% of the Holocene. We are about to make two more very emphatic statements, but for the time being, we are justified to say that 1850 to 1900 was on average globally colder than the previous 11,200 years, apart from the Little Ice Age, and was immediately followed by a period, 1900 to 1909, that was cooler than greater than 95% of the Holocene distribution. The final two quite emphatic facts are revealed when the Marquardt study put together the relevant data and conducted Monte Carlo simulations to arrive at an average temperature for the 1,000 years spanning 4,500 BP to 5,500 BP, which is minus 2550 CE to minus 3550 CE. They then moved the anomaly reference period from 1961 to 1990 to the reference period 4,500 BP to 5,500 BP. If we follow suit and clearly show the period 4,500 BP to 5,500 BP, we can see that the average temperature of the IPCC reference period was greater than 0.5 degrees centigrade below the 1,000-year mean. So to emphasize, for at least 1,000 years during the Holocene, the global temperature was more than 0.5 degrees centigrade above the IPCC reference period. Adding this to the list of conclusions, we can take a final step. Adopting the approach taken by Marquardt, we have changed the reference period to that of the average temperature of the entire Holocene from 1920 onwards. It turns out to approximately cover from minus 1900 CE to minus 8500 CE. Looking at the IPCC reference period, it is approximately 0.35 degrees centigrade below the Holocene mean. Without wishing to labour the point, this means that for more than 6,000 years, the Holocene mean global temperature was around 0.35 degrees centigrade above the IPCC reference period used in SR15. The list of arguments against regarding 1850 to 1900 as being normal is complete. The conclusion is quite straightforward. The reference period 1850 to 1900 does not represent an approximately normal or optimum global mean surface temperature. In fact, it represents an unusually cold period in the context of the entire Holocene. We can now move on to discuss whether using the reference period 1850 to 1900 allows us to establish a causal connection between global warming and increasing levels of carbon dioxide since the Industrial Revolution. This will be brief, as the evidence is very clear. Atmospheric carbon dioxide levels from 1850 to 1900 increased from 287 parts per million to 296 parts per million. This is an increase of 9 parts per million over 51 years. We've seen this chart before that shows that during the same period there was no rise in GMST. The trend was flat. So we can quickly conclude that the reference period 1850 to 1900 does not bring out a causal connection between global warming and carbon dioxide levels. But let's go one step further. If we extend the period to 1909, we find that the atmospheric carbon dioxide levels from 1850 to 1909 increased from 287 parts per million to 299 parts per million. This is an increase of 12 parts per million over 60 years. But temperatures over the 60 years actually fell. Extending the period to include 1850 to 1909, at least superficially, seems to demonstrate a negative impact. The conclusion is therefore straightforward. The reference period 1850 to 1900 is not an appropriate point to bring out the causal connection between global warming and increasing levels of carbon dioxide since the Industrial Revolution. The overall summary at this point is that 1850 to 1900 is not an appropriate reference period or start point to judge global warming. It does not represent the normal or optimum Holocene GMST. It is in fact exceptionally low. It must therefore exaggerate the degree of global warming, and it shows no causal connection between global warming and increasing levels of carbon dioxide. We must wonder, therefore, why it is being used. For now, this concludes the examination of the IPCC SR15 start point for the measurement of global warming. The next step will evaluate the end point of measurement. This is not as clear as you might assume. For the following analysis, it was necessary to reconcile data sources that use different reference points. The various deltas are shown here. We use the Hadcret 4 and Marcotte reference period of 1961 to 1990 as the base reference period. It should be noted that only Hadcret 4 data goes back to 1850, with the other databases starting at 1880. We are determining the end point of the measurement that produced this result of an increase of 1 degree centigrade within a range of 0.8 to 1.2. Care has been taken to use the definitions as provided by the IPCC in the SR15 report. This gives the start point as the average GMST of the period 1850 to 1900 and the end point as the average GMST of the period 1988 to 2017. This produces an increase of 0.728 degrees centigrade, which is well below 1 degree and is outside even the lower limit set by the IPCC of 0.8. So perhaps we need to try another endpoint. We could match the 51-year period of 1850 to 1900 with the 51-year period of 1967 to 2017. But this provides an even lower increase of 0.551 degrees centigrade. Could it be that the IPCC has compared the single year highest temperature since the Little Ice Age, 2016, with the average of 1850 to 1900? Doing this does provide a result that more closely matches the 1 degree of the IPCC and is within its range. But is it valid to compare a single year to an average? This approach certainly does not match the IPCC definitions of global warming. A slightly more valid approach might be to compare 2016 to the highest GMST of the period, 1850 to 1900. This was 1878. This brings the increase down to 0.762, which is again outside the range specified by the IPCC. Based on these results, we arrive at these conclusions at the end of step 2. The endpoint reference period used by the IPCC in SR15 is unclear. The IPCC claim of 1 degree centigrade of global warming above pre-industrial levels cannot be matched to the climate data records. The closest match we arrive at contravenes the IPCC's definition of global warming, as the estimated increase in GMST averaged over a 30-year period. However, using the IPCC definition, the increase in GMST as at the end of 2017 was 0.728 degrees centigrade, not 1 degree centigrade, as claimed. Perhaps the least clear part of the IPCC SR15 report concerns the lack of differentiation between human activities and those of natural factors. The report attributes 1 degree centigrade of global warming to human activities. This statement seems to imply that human activities are the sole cause of global warming. But as long ago as 1990, the IPCC itself had noted that some of the global warming since 1850 could be a recovery from the Little Ice Age, rather than a direct result of human activities. If we look at the present Holocene interglacial, we see the temperature swinging from purely natural causes, from cold to warm to cold. As this scenario portrays, it could be that present global warming is just a natural undulation of global temperature, as the IPCC 1990 report suggests, and that the world is returning to the warm period previously experienced in the mid-Holocene. To give some credence to this thought, we can examine previous interglacial periods. Around 800,000 years ago, the world moved into cycles of very cold glacial periods, separated by warmer interglacial periods. Glacial cycles of the 100,000-year duration are often referred to as having a sawtooth pattern, as GMST swings up and down. Although it is difficult to see on this diagram, interglacials such as the Holocene often follow similar undulating patterns. A closer view of the interglacials confirms this. If we pick out just a few examples, the rise and fall of temperatures is clear. The one thing that cannot be identified is any period of extended stability. As previously noted, it seems that the climate is forever changing. This scenario of a natural recovery cannot thus be discounted, at least entirely. And previously, the IPCC has not discounted natural factors. In the 2014 Summary for Policymakers, the effect of natural factors, as opposed to human actions, is recognised. In the report, the IPCC states that more than half of global warming is due to human activities. While the acknowledgement of natural factors is welcomed, the apportionment of more than half to human activities is less precise than we would wish. It is difficult to know what to do with that statement. Should we just pluck a figure out of the air? Let's settle for 70%, which is more than half and is even more than 2/3. But it will do for purposes of illustration. Based on 70%, this statement should change to this. We can summarise. The IPCC claim of 1 degree centigrade of global warming above pre-industrial levels does not explicitly take into account a natural rebound from the Little Ice Age. For clarity, the IPCC should explicitly state the percentage of global warming it attributes to natural causes. This clarity is a fundamental requirement of governments and policymakers. It is difficult to see how such bodies can make far-reaching decisions without such clarity of information. It is time to detail the conclusions and to make constructive recommendations. The reference period 1850 to 1900 as the start point for the measurement of global warming is not fit for purpose. This reference period cannot be considered to represent a normal or optimum GMST. As this period represents, in fact, a low GMST, then using this reference period must exaggerate global warming. It should also be noted that when using this reference period, it does nothing to establish a causal link between carbon dioxide levels and global warming. The claim of 1 degree centigrade global warming cannot be substantiated from the available climate data and the IPCC's own definition of global warming. Finally, the proportion of global warming due to natural factors is not explicitly stated and thus crucially undermines the claim that 1 degree centigrade of global warming is caused by human activities. So what is to be done? Here are some recommendations to the IPCC. Change the start point reference period from 1850 to 1900 to 1961 to 1990. This recommendation will align IPCC reports to other data, such as HADROT 4, and perhaps set a standard for others to follow. This should be quite simple to accomplish, as this reference period was already utilised in the IPCC 2013 report. In line with your own definition of global warming, make the endpoint reference period the average of the last 30 years rolling. Adopting these two recommendations would result in a GMST increase of 0.416 degrees centigrade. And finally, and essentially, make explicit the IPCC estimate of the amount of global warming due to human activities and the amount due to natural causes. As an illustration, if we adopt the arbitrary figure of 70% increase due to human activities, we would arrive at a final figure of 0.291 degrees centigrade. This brings this video to an end, apart from an appeal to help the IPCC change the SR15 report and adopt the recommendations made in this video. Your help is requested in asking the IPCC to change this statement. Apart from the normal social media channels, it is possible to directly contact the IPCC. I have contacted the IPCC on several occasions to ask for help with research. I was treated very politely and received great help and information. I would ask that we are always polite in any communication with the IPCC. We can work together to make the changes requested.